All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Mindy Mandell today to discuss the Platonic concept of the soul. Mindy has a lovely YouTube channel that you should all check out. The link is in the description for that. Mindy, how did you first got started into studying Platonism? What got you interested in it, and how long have you been at it?
I've been doing this for a little over 20 years now, and I got into it because a friend of mine is a Platonist, and the way he talked about it is very much like the way I read Plato now, and it was just absolutely fascinating to me. I did take like an introductory philosophy course in university, and it just did nothing for me at all, and I was completely turned off to Plato. Um, Never imagined myself being a Platonist. But when I started reading the dialogues as something meaningful to my life, then something sparked, and I just needed to keep reading these dialogues. And then I met Dr. Pierre Grimes, and he's the teacher I've been working with for these past 22 years or so. And he's just a brilliant, amazing man. And so, I don't know, it just kind of took off from there.
Great. Yeah. I'm curious about Pierre Grimes because I have seen a few of his lectures and they're very inspiring. But what is his story? Do you know how he got into Platonism? You know what he's best known for?
Well, he got into it many, many years ago. He's like in his 90s now. He got into it actually he was first I think he was first into Hinduism. And then I'm not sure how he came to read Plato. But I know that he did have some experiences in World War II that got him thinking, what is wrong with this world? It's crazy. And um, I don't want to say too much of his story because it's for him to tell. I'm not sure of it
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
detail. But his he does have a system of that's called philosophical midwifery, which is a method of clearing away our false beliefs. So this is something that can complement Platonism as it's generally practiced. Because of course in Platonism we're looking to know the nature of reality, but along the way we find a lot of false beliefs that hold us back. And so having a system to look at your false beliefs and clear them away is something that I think is very helpful. And so that's maybe his biggest contribution. And then also for me, of course, his approach to Platonism as a spiritual exercise, as a spiritual life, is something that I find very inspiring, and that's the way I read Plato now.
Yeah, and he can be read in so many different ways. I mean, you can approach it in terms of the kind of abstract philosophical system. Some people approach Plato as a kind of skeptic, critic, offering possibilities for us. And there is that deeper, I think, spiritual side
Yeah,
that appealed to me as well. I was also interested in Hinduism first, and that's how I got
mm,
into Platonism. So that's neat.
that's interesting.
S-
Yeah.
our intention is to talk about the soul today.
Oh,
And for me, trying to get into the exact kind of schematic of Platonic psychology has been difficult because of the issue of translation. There are very
mm,
particular Greek terms associated with these different faculties of the soul, and it's easy to get them all confused. So, to start with, would you mind breaking down just the basic tripartite soul as described in the Republic for us?
okay. Yeah. So you've got the wisdom loving part of the soul, which is the logos, and you've got the prideful part of the soul, um, which is the thumos in Greek. And then you've got the desire loving part of the soul, which is the epithumia. And these are brought into a discussion in the Republic in regards to the virtues. And so we generally associate the wisdom loving part of the soul with wisdom, the angry or prideful part of the soul with courage. And so the wisdom loving part of the soul is the part that is focused on the nature of reality and just stays focused on that and not the physical world. And the courage in the soul, the ideally, courage is when we are allowing ourselves to stay focused on wisdom, on the nature of reality, I should say. And so we're not letting ourselves be distracted by pleasures or turned off by pains or fears. And so that's courage. And so that's the role of the thumos in the soul. And then the desire loving part of the soul is ideally, it's the part that we tend to focus on, and it's, keeps us scattered. But ideally, our desires will fall in line with what is healthy and true. And so that's known as temperance when we have that such soul. But temperance is sometimes associated with that epithumia, part of the soul. But maybe more accurately, it's a harmony of the three parts together. And then when the three are each functioning properly, each is in their own proper place, that's called justice. And so justice is the whole.
I remember being confused by justice and temperance when I first read the Republic, like 10 years ago, because they seem quite similar. So,
Yeah, they both deal with the soul as a whole.
temperance, I guess, strictly speaking, is the proper kind of hierarchical relation between the different parts of the soul, whereas justice is each part doing its own proper business, right?
Yeah, each doing its own proper, role.
Right.
And yeah, I think of temperance as like the harmony of the three in their proper balance.
So now this logos or logisticon, the top part of the soul, how exactly does this term logos line up with the other term that we hear about that highest part of the soul, nous or intellect? Would you say that nous is a kind of subset of logos? Because logos is a very wide-ranging term in Greek, right?
Mm. Uh, no, nous is a realm of reality. It's the realm of intellect. Like in the allegory of the cave, the upper world is the realm of nous. Logos is you might think of it as the intellectual order, if you will, of all the realms of reality. So logos runs through all.
Right, yes. So maybe you could take us through Plato's divided line. You have a recent video on that topic, which was very enlightening.
Oh, thank you.
So the divided line describes different elements for us of logos primarily. Then, I mean, it doesn't really touch on thumos or
Cognitive
epithumia as
functions. Yeah.
much.
It's the cognitive functions.
Right.
Yes. Mhm.
And would you mind taking us through that?
Oh, okay. So at the lowest end is what we might call image thinking. And this is like the conglomerate of what our senses take in, but then also our immediate conclusions, like recognizing it. The simplest form is recognizing this is a cup. Um, Very close to that is the idea of belief. And we'll find that there is a very interesting relationship here because as you go through the four sections, it's image thinking and then belief and then understanding and then knowing. And as you go through these, you'll find that you can go up. For example, our image, the images we take in, that's the basis for our beliefs. We build beliefs on that, and then from our beliefs we build understanding, and then we hope that with understanding we can jump to knowing. But we'll also find it goes the other way as well. And so at the lower end, that means that our beliefs can affect the way we interpret what we're seeing. And so like a very simple example would be if you go to a busy city and you really enjoy busy cities, you may think, wow, it's exciting here. Um, and that's because you have this belief that it's fun to be in a big city. If you're a person who hates big cities, then as soon as you see all the crowds, your first thought is something negative, right? And so we have to be aware that it goes both ways as well. And then it goes from the top all the way down to the knowing. Ideally, once we have some experience, we can use that knowledge then to question what we thought we understood. And so we work through some of our assumptions. And as we clear up our understanding, then our beliefs in the world of the cave, in the physical world, can also be, they will adjust over time. And we see it going both ways. So it's kind of an interesting process. So the idea of a wisdom tradition is that we don't already have knowing. And so we turn to the sages and we try to understand them, and we try to borrow from them to get a better understanding, because we don't want to just reinvent the wheel going from belief to understanding. We really need that knowledge to help us build some sense of understanding. And that's really where most of us, I think, spend a great deal of our time, is working on the theories and trying to, piece it all together and see the whole, if you will. Actually, one video that I'm working on right now is, I'm going to call it something like maybe the philosopher's journey, and talking about the stages of our journey. So the first stage is like in the cave. It's based on the allegory of the cave, because this is coming out of Plato's book 7. The first step is really breaking the chains and standing up and looking around the cave, right? So that's like our initial introduction to philosophy. And that's where we're first introduced to these thoughts like, what is the soul, or what is virtue, and so on. So like a lot of the early dialogues, they fit well to that first stage. But then the second stage is where we try to like study in a more, what should I say, in a more precise way, and putting the theories together and trying to see the whole. And that's a lot of what we're doing at the level of understanding. And so the difference between belief and understanding is that belief is focused on the world and the physical world, whereas what Plato means by understanding is that we are focused on the upper world, on the world of nous. So in the allegory of the cave, this is like the person who's going, there's a long, steep ascent to get out of the cave. And the person who is in dianoia, or understanding, is on that steep ascent. So you can see there's a wide opening in the cave where sunlight is coming in. This person can see the sunlight and is guided by that light, but cannot yet see what is outside. So there's a lot of assumptions in our thinking when we are on that long, steep ascent out of the cave. And that's dianoia, whereas knowing is where you are clearing away those assumptions.
Right, and finding the unhypothetical grounds at the end of it, which I think is especially clear in math, right? Euclid, we can all understand the proofs in Euclid, but you can't use dianoia or understanding to get the premises, the axioms. Those are given to us in some other way. So yeah, we have nous, dianoia, and then doxa. It's also sometimes the term is pistis. I guess they're roughly equivalent. And then the last one is ikasia. Is that right?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. And my understanding is that ikasia, I'm getting this from Iamblichus, the peculiar feature of ikasia is recognition of similarity and dissimilarity. Which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. And that kind of raises the question for me about the relationship between ikasia and phantasma, the role of like the image-making faculty in the soul, versus that ikasia, which is image recognition,
Yeah, I think Thomas Taylor actually connects it with phantasmia, I think it's pronounced. I may have butchered that. I'm not sure offhand, but I'm not fluent in Greek, I'm sorry. But I think he actually associates, Thomas Taylor does, associates echinacea with fantasia, or phantasmia, whatever it is.
Okay, right. So I was just curious if you could elaborate anything more on that relationship, and then the relationship between dianoia, which I guess the literal translation would be something like through thinking, which kind of matches up with the way that mathematical reasoning works, right? Moving from different things that are related, and then the term logos, which
Hmm.
involves, a lot of different meaning. It means word, it means truth, I guess, it means proportion. And I think that meaning of proportion of logos lines up well with this meaning of dianoia as through thinking. So am I just kind of seeing ghosts there, the dianoia logos connection, and then iconasia and phantasmia connection? Or is there a way of putting those together so that because I see like different
Hmm.
schemata. In the divided line, we have one set of terms, and then we have these other terms, logos and phantasmia. And I'd like
Hmm.
to bring them into the picture if at all possible,
Yeah, well,
you
the
know?
logos runs through everything. So ideally, we want to be tapped into the logos at the highest powers. We're using the logos, of course, as we're going through understanding, but also into knowing as well. So I wouldn't say that the logos is necessarily connected to dianoia specifically. It's more like it runs through everything, through all of our reasoning.
Right. Well, and Iamblichus
Mhm.
has some wacky opinions. I think most people are familiar with his beliefs on ritual magic, theurgy, and
Mhm.
if you want to practice those things, fine. But so he's not the most reliable source. I would sooner trust Proclus than Iamblichus. But one thing that Iamblichus says is that dianoia runs through the different cognitive faculties. So actually building from iconasia to pistis uses dianoia, this through thinking, comparing the different sense data and facets of receptibility in our faculties. So we can leave that because it's just this loose connection that I thought maybe you might have some thoughts on. But the next place to go then, past this divided line, would be the. I wanted to talk about that concept also from. I've been reading Iamblichus, so this is why all these ideas are coming to mind. But the idea that mathematics is somehow integral to the substance or essence of the soul. In the Timaeus, when the demiurge constructs the world soul, he combines a number of forms, I believe like similarity and dissimilarity, and a couple others. He mentions that it was very difficult to mix in dissimilarity into this mixture that he was concocting. So he combines some forms and then draws them out in particular ratios. I think he takes the powers of two, the powers of three, and then gets to the numerical ratios underlying the major consonant intervals, and this whole musico mathematical framework is what's used to construct the soul. So what do you think of that? What is Plato telling us by saying that the soul is somehow made of mathematical proportions?
Well, I think the idea there is that we can see these ratios throughout the whole unfolding of reality. And that is also partly the logos. That's another way of understanding the logos, is this understanding of um, of the order and the intelligibility of the unfolding of reality, of the realms of reality. And we can find these ratios supposedly within our soul. I have to admit that it's not my um, math has never been my doorway into the divine. But I know that for many people it is. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask that one to. But we can find these ratios in reality itself and in the soul, and then through all of, then there's the connection to of the way the souls are analogous to one another. Mhm.
Right, yeah, which makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then, because we have these mathematical proportions essentially in us, we, in some sense, occupy a similar position in the overall hierarchy as math does. You'll see in Plotinus, we have soul and then intellect in the one.
Mhm.
Well, mathematicals are typically said to exist between intellect and matter, which is beneath soul. And so soul then is also between intellect and matter. Math is between intellect and matter. So I do see some kind of fundamental connection between math and our substance, and then that lines up with the idea that dianoia flows through all of our cognitive faculties. The logos flows through all things, but particularly that kind of mathematical character of connected relations, this kind of
I've
logical
never,
principle.
sorry, I've never heard this idea of math being between intellect and matter. I've heard math the way Pythagoras has taught it as a doorway into the divine, a way to understand that which is beyond intellect.
Right. Well, reading The Divided Line,
Mm,
my take has always been that the shorter part of the line segment
mhm,
within intelligibles, the
mhm,
reflection of intelligibles,
mhm,
is actually mathematicals, because
mhm,
they're eternal like the forms, but they're
mhm,
extended, and so they're not as impartible, and so not as powerful. And so that kind of lines up with Proclus's logic that more impartible things exert their effects further, and then lower
mhm,
things in the ontological hierarchy are more dispersed. So mathematicals are more dispersed than the forms, but
mhm,
they're more eternal than mundane things. And that's also like
mhm,
us. Like we have one foot in the intelligible, one foot in the
mhm,
sensible. Our essence is in eternity, our energies are in time,
mhm.
something like that.
Yeah, I would say that one is the principle of number, and number is often referred to as the monads. And so that's another way of thinking about number.
Yeah. And that's another ambiguity for me reading different Neoplatonic
Mhm,
authors. It's
mhm,
not always clear where the place of number is. I found this reading where mathematicals can be a kind of intermediary between impartible forms and partible sensible things.
mhm,
But other times, reading especially the ancient Pythagorean
mhm,
sources, it seems as though these archetypes of number are
mhm,
prior to basically anything else.
mhm,
So, I don't know if there's one universal consensus on the place of math as a whole. Maybe there are aspects of math, like the idea of the pure limit or pure unlimited that go all the way to the top. Maybe there's the idea of the monad, which is kind of the archetype of the
mhm,
intelligible quantity one that goes
mhm,
higher. But then specific extended mathematical things are of a lower
mhm.
order, something like that. I mean, we're trying to make sense of it. So,
Yeah, I've always thought of number as the principles, as the higher. That limit is the truly one, because the true limit of things, and unlimited is. Mm,
yeah, which now that we've kind of gotten to that level of the limited and the unlimited, above that is the one. And I've always kind of interpreted, because of my Hindu background, probably
mhm,
Plato as ultimately locating kind of the core of the self in the one in some sense, like as the kind of truest kernel of our being, just like the
mhm.
Atman is Brahman.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
the core of our soul
Mhm,
is one with the one, or something
mhm.
like that. And
Yes.
Plotinus, often talks about trying to lead us back up to the one. But then when I read someone like Proclus, he is
Mhm,
very definite about the different grades of essence in reality, and our kind of essence, he would say,
mhm,
cycles indefinitely, like the imagery of the Phaedrus moving up into the intelligible, going back down for a birth.
mhm,
And
mhm,
Proclus would say, we are kind of bound to eternally cycle at our own level of being, and that we can't decline into irrational animal life because intellect is essential for our nature as a human soul, and then we can't necessarily move beyond a human soul. So that is not entirely compatible with this kind of pseudo Vedic reading of
mhm,
Plato as a
mhm.
kind of monist mystic. Where do you fall on that? Where is the kind of core of the self? Are we consigned to perpetual human reincarnation? What do you think of that?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, as for what is beyond being human, that I'm going to hold out on that one, on that question. But certainly, I think that our goal in this human life is um, to to know the essence of the soul, which is to to rise to the one, or the good, as it's called in the Republic. Um, So it's very, and I think that Proclus is very much consistent with Plotinus on that one, actually.
Hmm.
There are some places where he's a little more, sometimes in many places, he's very rigorous in his logic, but there are places where he's a little more mystical in the way he writes.
Hmm.
And yeah, he does seem to be consistent with Plotinus on that one.
Okay, so you would say that there's something in the essence of the
Mhm.
soul that is akin to that higher unity.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Hmm.
that then raises the question for me of the nature of essence, because
Hmm.
some people would say that unity is beyond essence. So, what principle then, would be at the core of the soul? Typically, we think of the essence of something as being that kernel, that most essential attribute of a thing. But if there are things beyond essence, is there something within essence that is superior to essence in us?
Well, I think when you say essence, what you mean metaphysically would be being. And um, to go beyond that metaphysics into the super essentials, there's the one being, which would be the monad of the intelligible realm. And the one is ultimately beyond that, that we will never fully touch, but is the cause, if you will, or the condition that allows all to be. And so in Platonic metaphysics, there is actually quite a bit, there are conditions for essence to be. So where you when you get into those conditions, then it's we have a lot of fun, talking about how we can't talk about that because it technically doesn't exist if it's the cause of existence. It's prior to existence, metaphysically prior. And prior here, of course, not in time, but in the sense of being a condition for something to be. So it technically doesn't exist, so we can't say it is. And yet, being the condition for existence, we can't say it's nothing. And so we're stuck because we can't really say anything, but then we say a great deal about how we can't say anything about it. Right? And that's ultimately our goal, is to rise to that condition and to know that that's the one.
So I guess a good comparison then would be the way that Orthodox Christians think of theosis versus the way that people in Advaita Vedanta think of, well, I don't know what you would call it. Is it henosis or, complete unity with identity of Atman and Brahman is the ultimate goal. Whereas in Orthodox soteriology, you approach the divine, but then never lose your essence entirely. So the division between God and not God, let's say, is always preserved, but you get as close as possible, maybe eternally moving ever closer, and that is the kind
Mhm.
of most blissful state. Whereas for many Hindus, the idea is to completely release whatever is particular to yourself and identify wholly with the universal
Mhm.
and Brahman. So would you say that this idea in Plotinus and Proclus of the fate of the soul, or the hopeful fate of the soul, is closer to the Orthodox view or Advaita Vedanta?
Yeah, it's that higher view of becoming one with the one,
Mm.
going beyond the duality of subject object to true one, because one is beyond unity. A unity is a unity of things, of many coming together, right? But the one is the condition for that unity. So
Right.
to rise to the one means to go beyond the duality of subject object. It's actually technically not an experience then.
Sure. Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
not technically
Mhm.
a being at that level.
Mhm.
So you
Right.
use the term existence
Hmm.
kind of equivalently to essence. And in Thomas Taylor's translation of the Elements
Hmm.
of Theology, I found that he used the term hyparxis as signifying existence, and well, he would translate it as essence, but ousia as essence.
Right.
And the way I was trying to make sense of it was
Mhm.
taking ousia to mean An essence in the sense of the defining feature of a thing. So intelligibles have essences because they are intelligible, because they're definable in some sense. There's some like particular quality about them that's unique. Whereas the henads don't have ousia, but they still have hyparxis. They still have existence if you translate hyparxis in that sense.
Hmm.
But they're above any kind of they can't be hemmed in by a single definition, so they don't have, strictly speaking, essences. They interpenetrate one another more than the intelligibles, although the intelligibles also interpenetrate each other. So it's, different grades of intermingling in these
Yeah,
different
when the gods go
levels.
into reality, into being, then at the intelligible realm, then they are absolute realities. So that's the difference between like a monad and a henad, I think, as I understand it. Mhm.
Yeah. So,
But
but what do you think about this terminology of
yeah,
hyparxis as existence? Because then we get to say that the gods
mhm,
do exist. The one exists, but it doesn't have
yeah.
essence in the sense of
Mhm.
being defined as one
Well,
thing.
hyparxis is like the highest flowering of something, whereas the word ousia is actually a really good word to learn. Like I don't actually read Greek, but there are a few key words, that we have to that we're going to keep coming across and we have to learn. And I think ousia is one of them because it's much more dynamic than the word essence implies to us. Um, when we talk about the realms of reality, the way Proclus talks about it, it's being, life, and intellect. It has this threefold nature. And there's a reversion where the intellect of it reverts back to know its cause. And that reversion causes it to know itself and then to unfold the next realm of reality. And that dynamic quality is ousia. That's the essence of the realm. And our soul also has an essence in that sense. And so our spiritual quest is really a process, if you will, of ousia. You can think of it that way.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. Okay. So another question on the nature of the soul is what connects the soul with the body and how exactly that works. Does the body participate of the soul? Are there intermediaries between the soul and the body? What's going on there?
Well, maybe the easiest way to talk about it is to go back to the allegory of the cave, because the world inside the cave is, you can think of it ontologically as showing the lower realms, the physical realm, or the realm of materiality, the realm of nature, and the realm of soul. And so, for those listeners who are not well versed on this allegory, we see ourselves, or Socrates has us imagine ourselves as like prisoners in a cave where we have been chained since childhood. We haven't been able to even turn our necks. All we ever see are these shadows on a wall, and we mistake those shadows for reality. But what those shadows actually are is that behind the prisoners, there are some things being carried back and forth. And then behind those objects, there's a fire. And the fire then is the light of the fire is allowing those objects to cast their shadow on the wall. Now, this is significant in understanding the realms of reality because the fire represents the realm of soul. And soul is considered to be, it's called the self mover. It's like the principle of motion in the physical world, because beyond soul, you have intellect, which it's eternal. It doesn't move in the way that physical things move, right? So soul is the first mover, if you will. It's considered the self motion or the principle of motion. And in fact, in the Phaedrus, Plato defines soul as this principle of motion. That motion is the key thing that defines what soul is. And so, going back to the allegory of the cave, then the fire then is what allows those objects to cast their shadow. So it's what moves it. So it's that motion within the cave, within the physical world. But then those objects are like they represent, you might say, the realm of nature. And so they are moved by the realm of soul, and then in turn, they move physical bodies. And then the shadows, of course, are the physical forms. And so we look at them and we think that body is what is real and that bodies are moving. But actually, it is soul and nature that move the body. The physical realm or the realm of materiality is said to be like a passive receiver of natural and psychical reason principles, meaning that it's moved by them. So the realm of soul is the self mover. The realm of nature, it moves and is moved, or it is moved first and then it moves. And then the realm of materiality is moved only. And so the body, we think of ourselves as having soul within our body, but it would actually be more accurate to say that that soul is embracing the body, or
Mm,
sometimes think of it as like a marionette puppets. The soul is somewhere, moving us around, and we think we're moving the body. But you take soul and nature away from a body, all you've got is a corpse.
right. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of
Mm,
ideas in there.
mm,
So,
yeah.
matter as this ultimate receptacle is metaphysically necessary for Proclus, because if you didn't have an ultimate uh, patient, then reality would go on indefinitely, and the infinite is unknowable. And so, to have an intelligible cosmos, you have to have kind of a last stop on the journey. So, matter would be that, and above matter, matter is structured by form, and matter structured by form is something like nature. Could you give us another definition of the concept nature or physis?
um, well, you also may see the term like irrational soul, as opposed to soul being the rational the soul, or like the like plants. There's some debate, I think, between different Platonists as to whether plants have a soul or not. Um, but I think most would put it at the level of nature, whether they call it soul, like irrational soul, or they call it nature only. Um, but that's like that has more to do with like basic generation and those qualities that do not require rational thinking, like plants. And we, of course,
Right.
also participate in the realm of nature as well as the rational soul, the realm of soul.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard it said that nature is intermediate between body and soul. Maybe body is matter structured with
Mm,
form,
mm,
perhaps, and then once you have body, and it's in its complex of generation, then that is nature, and then nature
mm,
just has the meaning that we mean by nature, the natural
mhm,
world, basically.
mhm.
But would you say that's accurate? Nature is between body and soul.
Yeah, or you may think of nature as the instrument through which soul moves physical things.
So those logoi or natural reason principles are in soul primarily. Is that where the logoi, the principles of nature, as in like I would assume the laws of physics and such, those sorts of things, do they first appear in soul, or are they uh, prior to that even?
Well, the way I understand it is that outside the cave, when you get to like the realm of intellect and beyond, then you're talking about ideas or ideas. But in the cave, you're talking about reason principles. And so we talk about psychical reason principles at the realm of soul and natural reason principles at the realm of nature.
Right, right.
Mm,
So you have idoi and then logoi.
mm,
Logoi appear in soul and then manifest in nature under the
mm,
guidance of soul. Now, another intermediary
mhm,
has a similarity to this principle of nature, which is the pneuma, right? The pneuma I've heard described as being a kind of universal field that interpenetrates all things in nature. But then it also, we have a pneumatic vehicle ourselves of the soul. So it's a kind of subtler matter that is higher than gross matter. It's more permanent. In towards the end of the Elements of Theology, Proclus goes so far as to say that each soul has a single eternal pneumatic
mm,
vehicle that travels with it. So what about this idea of the pneuma? How is that related to nature? And then where would the pneuma first appear?
Oh, yeah, this I'm not really well versed on, but the idea there that there is a part of soul that is not, that is closer to body and is not immortal. And then there is that part that is immortal, the essence of it that is immortal.
Hmm.
So something, it's like especially with Proclus, there always have to be things in between, right? That
Yeah.
connect things. And you always wonder, it have to go on infinitely. How does he work this? But I think they want to put something between that which is completely immortal and that which is completely mortal. And so there is this subtle body, like I think that's what it's called in
Hmm.
Hinduism, right? The subtle bodies, and I don't know exactly how many they have.
Several. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. And I don't know how many Proclus has, but he has more than one as well. I remember in his Elements of Theology. Um, but it's becoming like more and more mortal as it gets closer to body, to physical body, right?
Right, yeah, yeah.
Mm,
As the soul descends, it
mm,
acquires matter or something like matter into its
mhm,
pneumatic vehicle. I think
mhm.
that's the way he puts it.
Yeah, so that's closer to like irrational soul or the realm of nature.
Right,
The
right. So
means, the
maybe,
instrument it uses, sorry.
so
Go
the
ahead.
pneumatic vehicle may then join the rational soul, logos, with thumos and epithumia, something like that,
Mm,
binding it to the natural world. Okay. Now, I know you said you're not too well versed on the concept of pneuma. It's one of the most enigmatic concepts. I often find that it seems like Plato is intimating at the idea of pneuma. Also, sometimes it seems like he's intimating at the idea of astrology, but then never goes so far as to really make it explicit that he's.
mm.
Um,
That's nice. Yeah, he goes into both the pneuma and the astrology. Yeah.
yeah, but
Mm,
he keeps it relatively enigmatic when he
mhm,
talks about those
mhm,
concepts in particular.
mhm,
But
mhm,
we also have in Christianity the idea of the pneuma, the Holy Spirit, and then we
mhm,
have the suke in Christianity, which is the same term as soul in just for all the Greeks.
mhm,
And yet in Christianity, the idea is that the pneuma is kind of superior to suke in some sense. Live by the Spirit. What do you think about, there's a definite spiritual state that is achievable that Christians are talking about there when you live by the Spirit. If the Spirit is this thing that connects all living organisms, it's beyond any one person. It's not exactly structured strictly by dianoetic principles. It abides by the rules of nature more so. Maybe it's more intuitive, not in the sense of intellect, but another kind of intuition. And that kind of inspired state is critical for a lot of
mhm,
spiritual practices.
mhm,
So, do you think that, I mean, often Platonism can seem a bit dry in that, okay, first you have to, study music and grammar and, do some gymnastics, study math, and then through math you can contemplate these forms that never change, and then ultimately you can just think about things that never change and presumably never
mhm,
change yourself. Whereas pneuma, living by the Spirit, seems very, very dynamic and connected to the network of things. So do you think there's room for both of these kinds of spiritual experience, the contemplative, focus on essence versus the kind of dynamic, inspired, frenzied living by the Spirit?
Well, you've got a lot there. I think when you brought in Christianity and the idea of the pneuma, it sounded like a very lofty understanding of the word pneuma, whereas the way we were talking about it as this realm or this subtle body of sorts that's between matter and the realm of nature, it's at the lower end of our of the realms of reality. But certainly, I do think that Platonism is ultimately a spiritual life, and to go out of the cave to go into the upper world is really that spiritual kind of experience. And the height of the analogy of, or the, I'm sorry, the allegory of the cave is to see the sun itself, which is representative of like that kind of brilliant light experience of being filled with light. And then we have to go back down into the cave and try to integrate it and understand the experience. And so that's very much a big part of the life of a Platonist.
Going back down and
Mhm.
integrating it is where I think the kind of mechanics, the psychological mechanics of living by the spirit in some sense makes more sense in Platonism, because if you make contact with those eternal structuring
Mhm.
principles, then the way that your soul interfaces with your body will be more
Mhm.
integrated. Your appetites aren't
Mhm.
like obliterated. Your appetites are
Mhm.
put in line with reason ideally. And
Right,
maybe then
right,
your pneuma
right.
is put in accord with the universal
And
pneuma, and you can live by the spirit in that sense.
right, when you understand the nature of reality and you have a better understanding of your place in the whole, and in this whole and this physical world makes more sense to you, then yes, your desires are naturally going to fall in line more and more with what is right and true. And so that's temperance, sophrosynt.
Right, in terms of
Yeah.
virtue. But then in terms
Mhm.
of like
Mhm.
powers that are gained,
Mhm.
when we hear stories about what Pythagoras did, I mean, he focused on mathematics. He was all about kind of exiting the cave and making contact
Mhm.
with that higher world.
Mhm.
Some people would say that he was an incarnation of Apollo himself.
Mhm.
But, he had these uncanny intuitive abilities. Like he was very good at assessing someone's character based on their appearance. He was very good at deciding what kind of melody to perform to
Mhm.
harmonize someone's state of soul. So the output of this emphasis on mathematics and getting connected to eternal realities was an ability to interface in a spiritual way in the natural world more intuitively in a more
Mhm.
integrated way.
Mhm.
So it just to again reinforce that point that the
Mhm.
pneuma, even if it's a subsidiary principle, can still be a sign of spiritual progress if you see evidence that your pneumatic activity is in
Mhm.
line with the universal pneuma.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I would say that to live wisely, to truly live wisely, is more than just having some insights or putting some theories together. It's a way of seeing the world, and when you're just operating freely and naturally through that those higher energies, where it those are like those from that state of mind, it's like you just know what to say and you know what to do, and it all just kind of falls together. Um, it's not about like, oh, I have to think about this theory and that one to come up with the right answer. It's like you just know it naturally. Your daimon speaks to you freely,
Mm-hmm.
and you just naturally, um, have the right answers, and you're just in the right place at the right time, and you're
Right.
just, yeah. And so I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see
I
that
think
behavior in
language.
Socrates
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
clearly.
Mhm.
He's always just at the right place at the right time. These
Mhm.
fortuitous coincidences happen for him.
Mhm.
So there's a way in which then the ideal state of soul is the kind of maximally integrated conspiracy of these various levels of being, all kind of aligned together and working with each other. So it's more complex than just the tripartite soul, but that's kind of the simplest model of it, that it's the different components of the soul working together.
Mhm.
But ultimately, we have matter being structured by form in the most integrated way possible, ideally with the best state of soul, and then we have that natural principle, again in accord with its being in soul and its being in nature, the pneuma being connected to those universal pneumatic principles, the soul proper, the different elements of soul, epithumia, thumos, and then ultimately nous, and then above human soul, there also is like the input, as you said, of the daimon. So we have our own titular daimon. And then, I mean, presumably beyond that, we have the help of heroes, angels. I mean, if you take these other orders of the Neoplatonic hierarchy of things. And then we also interface and cooperate with the forms and ultimately the gods. And so all of these in a column kind of come together in the individual. So, I mean, that again kind of raises the question of, in all of this, if there's this conspiracy of many elements acting together in what we are, what are we in the truest sense? We already kind of touched on this question with the soteriology, fate of the soul, what's the goal question, but in terms of like identifying us in this ladder of different elements. I mean, we're not the body, clearly. We're not necessarily the tripartite soul. Where do we fall, strictly speaking? This is one of the questions in the Alcibiades.
Right, yeah. It focuses on the question of know thyself and what is the soul. And yeah, that is really the journey of going through, you might think of it as the cognitive functions, is going through from dianoia to understanding, and having these higher experiences, I think, are important in understanding the nature of reality and seeing that we are that. If you're trying to hold on to your individuality, you're gonna have a real struggle.
Okay, so
that.
in aspirational terms, I think I agree, and I would ultimately take this kind of monist interpretation that the goal is a return to the one. But then in terms of like describing the dynamics of what happens with the soul, like which part of the soul transmigrates, if you accept the idea of transmigration, what moves on, what is more immortal? Is it the rational soul, or?
I think that would be the technical term to describe it. Yeah, rational soul, the logos.
And a question I've had is like, clearly people have different rational capacities and they energize differently according to reason, but there's another sense in which everyone is basically identical when it comes to the makeup of the rational soul. We all have the same logoi in us. I mean, if all of us in some sense already know everything, the Platonic doctrine of anamnesis, then I mean, the only thing that can really distinguish us in terms of the rational soul is how we might happen to be emphasizing some element of our knowledge at a given time. So would you say that the rational soul then is fundamentally universal and there's only one rational soul? Or would you say that there are different rational souls in the same sense that there are different forms or different henads?
Well, the way Proclus describes it, I'll use his language here, is that you have these monads and then there's the many in the train. And so there is a sense in which we can say that we are individual souls. I mean, clearly you and I are separate. And yet, as you move up, as you're going along and as you're participating in higher energies, that's the law of providence. We can participate in higher realms to the degree we're able to. As we have higher experiences, when we participate in higher realms, we will find that place where it is one. And then we will go beyond that.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the last, just to look at this question one more time in terms of essence and energy, perhaps, one way of reading Proclus, which you already indicated you don't necessarily agree with, is that, the essence of our soul, what is us, strictly speaking, our rational soul and its particular nature, essence, is immutable because it's eternal. And so it inexorably always will exist as our particular individual rational soul. Now, there's a way of harmonizing that with a more mystic conception of a return to the one ultimately, but that would place then our particular makeup of our rational soul in the position of that which transmigrates in our process of transmigration, and then perhaps the motion towards the higher worlds is simply not through time. right? So we can be locked in an eternal motion in time, and yet our motion kind of beyond time or upwards out of time. I don't think these two notions have to conflict. So we can say that the individual soul, as rational soul, does move with us and is eternal and immutable, and yet the soul still somehow, or our nature, or whatever the core of us is, can move out of that hypostasis of essence and go beyond it, just not as a motion in time. Would you say that that's...
Leaving the cycle, that's your question, is can the soul leave the cycle?
Well, the issue is there's a tension
Hmm.
between saying that the essence of the soul, the essence of our identity, is eternal, and saying that we can transcend our essence. Because then when do we transcend our essence? If our essence is eternal, it's always going to exist anyway. And so then how do we get out of it, you know?
Well, I think the we is where I would question it. You're still holding on to a sense of identity, whereas it's more of this energy is eternal.
Mm.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily. I would just suggest that maybe be open to the possibility of dropping the identity with the energy.
Yeah, exactly. That is the kind of conciliatory view that I was trying to indicate. That it may be, in terms of like the kind of, again, schematic of the whole system, there are many souls that are each eternal, that have their eternal cycles, and we identify
Mhm.
with one of these souls for a given point of time,
Mhm.
duration.
Mhm.
So the souls are eternal, but then that would mean that what we are is not the rational soul, but something beyond even it. And
Mhm.
it's interesting because Damascus and Proclus disagree on this point, in the Alcibiades, where Proclus identifies the rational soul as that kind of like fundamentally what we are, in terms of the topic of the dialogue, like know thyself, what are we talking about? And then
Mhm.
Damascus, I believe, it says that no, it's the entire tripartite soul that we're really concerned with as the individual kind of civic agent. We're talking to Alcibiades, who is kind of intrinsically a civic participant. That's his nature. So that's who we're talking about. They disagree, but neither of them speculate on this kind of higher mystic interpretation
Mhm.
that you're not even the rational soul. You're something beyond
Mhm.
soul, like you at your core, which there are many doctrines in Plato, like I said, the pneuma, or maybe
Mhm.
astrology, numerology, that remain more or less occult. They're kind of there, if you read into it a little bit. And I've always felt comfortable taking that leap and saying, like,
Mhm.
Plato doesn't say that we are souls. That our souls are closer to our fundamental nature than our
Mhm.
bodies, but our
Mhm.
fundamental nature maybe is
Mhm.
beyond that. So that it seems
Yes, I
like
would
that's where
agree with
you
that.
go as well.
Yes, I do. Hmm.
Okay.
And I think Damascus does as well. Maybe not
You think?
in the reading you were looking at, because I think Alcibiades is like the first, the one that they would read, right? So it's like the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they're not going to throw the highest doctrine in there, but certainly in his later writings, like now I'm actually working on his problems and solutions, um,
Mm-hmm.
about first principles. I forget the exact title. But that one, he definitely is going way beyond what was in the Alcibiades.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good to know. I haven't really
Yeah.
explored uh, the rest
Mhm.
of Damascus,
Mhm.
and he doesn't have surviving commentaries really. It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
Olympiodorus says that
Mhm.
Damascus says
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
So, I guess to close up, then, let's just ask the question of the nature of Plato's soul. This has been speculated throughout the ages. So, he's often called the
Mhm.
divine Plato.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? What about the status of the soul of Pythagoras, of Socrates, of Plato? Proclus offers different possible
Mhm.
kind of positions in the hierarchy of souls. What kind of soul did Plato have, Socrates,
Yeah.
Pythagoras?
Those are interesting questions. Well, if it is possible to leave the cycle, I suppose they are two men who would have left. Um, but certainly they did seem to have wiser souls um, coming into. the life that we know of theirs. Um, I don't know if I can't really say what happens after a soul has reached um, the highest level that humans can reach. So I don't really know where they go from there, but I hope to find out someday.
Okay, very hopeful note.
Mm.
All right, and now if you still have a
Mhm.
couple minutes, there are just a
Mm.
few questions
Mm.
in the chat that we could ask.
Okay.
So Brian G, from our discussion of nature
Mhm.
previously, asks,
Mm.
nature is a paradigmatic cause. Is there any way of making sense of that? In terms of the six causes in
Mhm.
Neoplatonism,
Mhm.
I guess all of them are involved in nature, right? And nature isn't
Mhm.
strictly a single cause. Maybe it uses all of
Well,
the cause.
I
Go
guess you
ahead.
can talk about all of the realms as having a monad that is a cause. But the
Okay.
paradigmatic cause, you're talking about the intelligible.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, and nature is
Mm.
subordinate to that.
Mm.
The realm of paradigmatic causes of things, and yet there's something to it because nature does form. It applies form intermediated through soul to matter,
Mhm.
so it's a participant in the process
Mhm.
of
Yeah,
paradigmatic
it
causation.
is a cause. Mm.
Okay. Let's see. Godward podcast. This is important here. And just in the future, guys, if you would try to contextualize it a little bit more, because I usually go back at the end to read these, so it's hard to remember exactly what we were talking about at this point. But he says this is important, like holding on to identity and identity, nationalism, transmigration, enlightenment, and then he asks a question: is it rational to want to retain identity slash tradition? Many people do. I would suppose you would say it is not fundamentally rational to want to retain those things. And yet,
It's understandable because it's what we've been all of our lives. It's how we see ourselves. But yeah, I think that the philosophical life is ultimately a spiritual life that is going to, if we take it far enough, it's going to cause us to question what identity is, what we are. Mhm.
yes, very true. And again, it's not necessarily at odds with the idea
Mhm.
of traditional identity. Socrates is adamant in the
Mhm.
Crito on observing the laws of Athens and
Mhm.
like the
Mhm.
tradition of his people, and
Mhm.
he has to be a part of it.
Mhm.
And that would be kind of similar to the idea of detached engagement from Hinduism. So once you've gotten there and kind of
Mhm.
detached from your own personal identity,
Mhm.
you still have, it's like they say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water; after
Mhm.
enlightenment,
Very well.
chop wood, carry
Mhm.
water.
Mhm.
Still gotta
Yeah, but you're playing a
participate.
role. You know that it's a role as opposed to
Yes,
mistaking it for ultimate reality. Mhm.
exactly.
Mhm.
And then Brian G again, is that identity slash tradition helping us
Mhm.
ascend or helping others ascend? Okay, so he's answering Godward's question, sort of, with
Mhm.
questions. If so, sustain it. If not, find something better.
Mhm.
Right, does a tradition help in the ascent? If so,
Mhm.
then maybe keep
Mhm.
it for
Mm.
its proper role.
Right. Along the way, we're always questioning ourselves if something is no good anymore. Something may have worked for you in the past. If it doesn't work anymore, you have to toss it out. That's courage. Mhm.
Yes, and there's do you remember the definition from the Cratylus of courage, where he's looking into the etymologies, and I think he says it's something like uh, a motion that is contrary to
Mhm.
injustice. So
Mhm.
the justice is this kind of in Heraclitus, and Cratylus is a
Mhm.
Heraclitean, so he's kind of responding to the Heraclitean position. But justice is this all-pervading thing associated with
Mhm.
fire, similar to the way the Stoics thought about it. And
Mhm.
occasionally there are currents, let's say, against that
Mhm.
universal justice,
Mhm.
and that's where courage then comes in, and
Mhm.
having to
Mm.
work against that
Ah,
contrary flow.
yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, that's good. Mhm.
Cratylus is a
Right. Mhm.
really interesting dialogue.
It
I remember
is.
we tried to
Mhm.
tackle it in a single week in our reading group, and we realized like this is not going to happen. It's going to take some time. All right. So I encourage you guys, if you're looking for more reading, Mindy is doing a reading group currently. So get in touch with her if you'd like to learn about that. Check out her channel. The link is in the description. Is there anything else that you're doing or anywhere else you'd like to refer the audience?
I have a book I can plug.
Okay.
I think it's backwards. Sorry. It's called Discovering the Beauty of Wisdom. And it's not backwards in real life, of course. But this is a book that I wrote about 2 years ago. It came out 2 years ago. It took me like 4 years to write it. But it was published 2 years ago from the Prometheus Trust. And it is a book about what Platonism is. It goes into some of the metaphysics, but also how to live as a Platonist.
Yeah, very, very nice. That's one of the things I like about your channel. You're always connecting it back to, how we live and that spiritual side. And I think that's
It
really where
doesn't have meaning, then you're just playing games. It's just mind games.
right. But even if you just want to play games, Plato also offers plenty of games and puzzles to look at. So, all right. Well, it was very nice speaking with you, Mindy. Thanks, guys, for listening, and have a good rest of your day.